four streams of thought in Descartes, which all focus on what would be an ethic if he had developed it more systematically. Okay? So that you can, in those ways, anticipate, construct, as a ghostwriter would construct for Descartes, his ethical theory. One of these streams of thought is about the passions and the power of reason to rule the passions. The second stream of thought is about the mind-body relationship, such that mind is a separate substance rather than part of the physical world. Now you see, since the soul is not part of the physical world, but is a separate substance, it's not an ingredient inherent in nature in the physical sense. The mind, as it were, stands aloof from nature, free from many of its causal processes, free to change nature, to modify nature's processes. And you get the same kind of note as in Bacon about the power that knowledge gives over nature. Now, both Bacon and Descartes, therefore, have been accused by some environmental advocates of our day of laying the groundwork for the abusive domination of environment and the raping of natural resources, which has gone on. Because if we're not part of nature, if our minds are not part of the natural order, but are able to dominate it independently, then well and good, this is what we've done. The rule of reason becomes the rule of science, which becomes the rule of technology after the Industrial Revolution, and as a result, the effect on environment. That, at least, is the interpretation that's given. Now, in addition to that mind-body relationship, then, emphasizing the exercise of power over nature, there is the will and intellect relationship, which we saw in relationship in regards to the problem of error. Error in rational judgments we make in Meditation 4. Error in perceptual judgment about physical objects. The will and intellect interplay come out in Meditation 6. But insofar as error is a kind of evil, cognitive evil, error is to truth what evil is to good, then plainly that will and intellect interplay applies to the good and evil issue as well. Deciding what is good and what is evil. Let not your will go beyond what you know in your intellect, you see. So the same kind of advice, the rule of reason in guiding the will, as in these other regards. But then, the fourth strain which flows into this ethic is a kind of provisional morality which he poses towards the beginning of his discourse on method. Now, that's a shorter work than the Meditations. Its focus is much more on methodology, even though he runs through the same general line of thought as in the Meditations. But when he has established the problem regarding skepticism, before he sets out to rebuild a philosophy from scratch, he sets out what he calls a provisional morality he will follow at this stage, even though he is so ignorant in terms of the knowledge that he's after, so ignorant as to whether or not this is unequivocally the right thing to do. Now, this provisional morality is interesting for the reason that it fits in perfectly, it seems to me, with what would be the conclusion of his inquiry, leading in this way into an ethic. It's a thoroughly prudential ethic, guarded by being reasonable in order to avoid bad consequences. It's precisely that. Let me read snatches from it. The first moral maxim is to obey the laws and customs of my country, constantly retaining the religion in which by God's grace I've been brought up since childhood. Now, that was a very prudent thing to do in days of persecution and controversy and so forth. And in all other matters, to follow the most moderate and least excessive opinions to be found in the practices of the more judicious part of the community in which I would live. Now, why be such a moderate? And his reason, as he puts it very simply, is then, if I should be in error, I won't have strayed too far from the truth. So don't take extreme positions. If you don't know for sure, just take a moderate position and play it safe. Number two, second maxim, to be as firm and determined in my actions as I could be, and not to act on the most doubtful decisions once I had made them, any less resolutely than on the most certain. In other words, don't waver. Make up your mind and act. Why? Well, this frame of mind frees me from repentance and remorse commonly felt by those vacillating individuals who are always seeking as worthwhile things which they will later judge to be bad. Don't keep wavering and be remorseful. Just get and do it. Sin boldly, if you like. Why? Well, think of all of the emotional turmoil of people who are always second-guessing themselves. This is the better way to a contented mind. Number three, my third maxim was always to seek to conquer myself rather than fortune, to change my desires rather than the established order, and generally to believe that nothing except our thoughts is wholly under our control, so that after we've done our best in external matters, and what remains to be done is absolutely impossible, at least as far as we're concerned, we will be contented that we have changed what we could. Well, that's precisely where his ethical thinking comes out in the end. And then finally, the fourth, I planned to make a review of the various occupations possible in this life in order to choose the best. And he goes on to say, I decided to stay with this philosophical occupation because I know of nothing which gives me greater contentment of mind. So there it is. What was it the Stoics said? Absence of pain in the body and trouble in the mind. That's Descartes, very plainly. So, Descartes' ethic, fascinating. Now, questions, comments?
I was wondering, how far does he go in his, controlling of the passions? Would he prefer to lose them altogether, or does he just want them nicely channeled?
No, because there are some passions that are positive. You see, if passions include perceptions and sensations as well as emotions, to lose them altogether would be to have no sense perceptions, you see. And if, on the other hand, he were to say, well, let's kill off all our emotions, then he would have no feeling of contentment. you see. There would be sort of an anomia. It would be sort of a dead, feelingless existence. And that's not what he wants. He wants a feeling of contentment. Dorothy?
I understand the way you presented one and two, but it seems to me the second part of your one is somewhat in conflict with one and two.
The second part of?
Should be most moderately vicious in the community, and in contrast, be firm and determined in actions.
Yeah.
Is he limiting being firm and determined in actions to his personal life as opposed to his community outreach or being proactive, say? I would not guess that he would,
Well, he was not a social activist.
nor would he be led to civil disobedience.
No, because he's going to obey the laws of his land.
But so to be firm and determined in his actions.
That would be in personal life.
Personal life.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see, the reason he gives, let's see, well, let me read a little more in that paragraph. Even if the direction is chosen at random, travelers finally arrive at some destination, not perhaps where they'd like to be, at least, but at least where they'll be better off than in the middle of a forest. So if you're lost in a forest, at least start walking, you see. Situations in life often permit no delay. When we cannot determine the course that's certainly best, we must follow one that's probably the best. And when we cannot determine that, select one and follow it as though it were certainly best. If it isn't a good one, at least the reasons for selecting it were good. Now, this frame of mind frees me from the remorse felt by vacillating individuals. You see. That business of if you don't know, at least start walking. You know, that's picked up by Jean-Paul Sartre in his image of the human condition, naufrage, shipwreck. You know, we're alone in a boat without rudder or compass on an ocean that has no bounds. Which way shall we row? Doesn't make any difference, just row. You see, that gives meaning to life while you're alive. So Sartre takes it in a very different direction, but Descartes' original idea. Once again.
I was curious as to what his criteria were for choosing the best occupation. Criteria for best. It seems
Yeah.
that's what best suited him based on his
Yeah. Yeah, best certainly in terms of consequences. In terms of, I think you have to say emotional consequences. Yep. Yep. Yeah, best in terms of handling the passions, a life of contentment, absence of pain in the body and trouble in the soul. Yeah. Descartes had the reputation, by the way, of being a tireless debater, so that in the Parisian salons of the day, the social evenings, he would take a very unpopular position and argue it, against all comers. And when he had them convinced that he was right, he'd say, well, now let's look at the other side, and then he would turn the table over and argue the other side of the thing. That was